We've already learned how to put a background image into a web page using CSS Grid. The next thing we want to show you is how to put in a background image that uses 100% of the viewport's height and width. What is the viewport? Basically, the viewport is that area you see in the browser when you first load it. So if I make the browser narrower, that's now the viewport. If I make it wider, it's now a wider viewport. Notice that there's an image that always appears in this viewport and that there's actually some more content below it. Section 1, Section 2, and Section 3. But yet, if I load the page or refresh it and scroll back up to the top, you'll notice that the viewport setting stays the same regardless of how wide I make it. We've also added some text and some buttons and things on top of that. We'll show you how to do that using another element. What you want to notice about the image, though, as well, is that it is a background image and that it shows starting from the center position of the image both horizontally and vertically. So if you do make the browser very narrow, you need to have an image that will work well that way, because it's basically going to take the center of the image and start cropping away material at the outside edges. So the center is always the center. If we make the browser wider, you'll notice that the area of the background image that shows up differs now. We've now cut off part of the top of the head of the trumpet player at this point. So if you have a very wide setting like that, you're going to cut off some material at the top and the bottom. If you have a very narrow setting like this, you'll start to cut off more at the outside edges, left and right. So how do we make this? Let's go back and open the setup.html file we have on our computers. We'll open it with brackets. This should be a document you already have. If you don't, you may want to take a moment and type this in and call it setup.html. I'll leave it here on the top of the screen for just a moment, so you can type that in if you pause the video. And here's the little bit that remains at the bottom of the screen. All right, we'll start with that. We're going to save the document. And instead of calling it setup, we'll call it full-screen-image.html. So you'll notice this document has all of the things we need in it to begin. It has the meta viewport tag to make the page scale properly when we are looking at it on other types of devices, mobile, tablet, desktop, etc. We have the box sizing information in here we tend to put on every page. And in the HTML, we started with the div class of container because we are going to need a grid container to make this work. We're going to start with the HTML. We're going to go back inside the div container. And we're going to begin with a header. We're going to type header open and header close. And that's it. The header is going to contain nothing more than a background image. So we're making what's called an empty element down here. Meaning there's nothing inside the tag. It will get filled by the background image that will be done with CSS in a moment. The first thing we'll need now is, after the header, a div with a class name. Class name will be header-text. And this is going to be the layer that's going to overlay the background image. We'll move the close tag down just a little bit. We're going to put quite a few items inside of this, so we'll start with an H1. Inside that, it will say Urbino Jazz Club. If you want to go back and look at what we're creating, we'll do that. Creating the HTML for this particular area now, you'll notice that it has white text on a black background, but there's some transparency to the background. So that's the H1. Next thing we'll need is a paragraph of text. And I'll just type in the following. Like so. Our club is open to members who want to hear some of the finest jazz in the area. Join us. That's inside a paragraph tag. Next, we're going to make the button. What button are we talking about? This red button here It would supposedly be a link that has a red background color with some transparency on it as well. That will also go up inside this div class of header-text, so we'll put it in here as another div. We'll call this one a class name of BTM for button. Put in a little space down below. Inside of this, we're going to put in a linking tag. We'll simply put in a pound sign there because we don't want it to actually go anywhere right now. Inside this, we'll type the word enter. Okay, so the div class of header text is all of this material. Inside of it are children elements for the Urbino Jazz Club, which is an H1, a paragraph of text, and another div with a class of BTM. And the next thing we'll do is put in the sections down below. So keeping in mind that this is the header text area, this is the closing tag for the container, which is up here. So it needs to go right down here below the header text area. We're going to start by doing a div with a class of section 1. Remember, section is an HTML5 element name, but section 1 is not. So we'll do this as a class with a div with a class. Inside of the div section 1, we will put in a H2 tag. And I'll simply type here section 1. Down below the H2, we will need a paragraph of text. We'll copy and paste that a few times. And that should be enough. So here's the div open for the class of section. Let's copy all of that and paste it 2 more times. This one will become section 2. We'll change the header label as well. And finally, section 3. So there's the div class section 3, section 2, and section 1. These are inside the container as such. It's time now to write some CSS. So we're going to do this up here inside the document, inside the style section. Before the stop close tag, we're going to add the following. The first thing we're going to do is do something to the entire page by using the HTML selector. And I'm going to give it a font family, so this will apply to the entire page. And that's all we're going to do there. I like to do the body tag as well. Here I'm simply going to do margin 0. This will make sure we don't get any white around the edges of the layout. Let's do some general styling before we get into CSS Grid. Let's do the H1 tag, and we're going to give it a certain font size. I'll do 3EM. Remember what's H1 here. If we go back and look at it, this is the H1 tag, Urbino Jazz Club. The H2 that's on the page down below for enter, we're going to do as well. We'll do 2EM on that. Don't forget this. You'll probably want this on every page you do. We want to set a max width on the images to 100% and a height of auto. This will make sure the images scale properly when you make the browser narrower. Let's change the link looks as well. We'll give it a color of $EEE, which is a very light gray. We'll do the same thing with A:visited. I'll give it a little darker color. I'll do AAA. And let's turn off the text decoration for both of these. In other words, remove the underline from the link. Like so. Next up, we're going to start to do the CSS Grid placement by doing a container. So the container on the page will use the following declarations. Well, we always begin with display : grid, so we can turn this into a grid container. We're going to do the columns with grid-template-columns. We'll do a 6-column grid here by using the repeat function. That's 6, 1 FR. We could actually get by with fewer than 6 columns, but we'll do it this way anyway. Grid-auto rows. And we'll use, as we always do, the min-max function. The minimum will be 120 pixels, and the maximum will be auto. Let's also set a maximum width for the layout, something pretty wide. Let's do 1920 pixels like that. So max width : 1920 px semicolon. The header goes in next. We begin with doing a grid-column 1/7. To place the header on the entire width of the 6 columns, we need to do 1/7. We're going to tell it what the grid row number will be, even though we wouldn't really need it here because it will be automatically placed on the first row. In this particular case, we'll do this because we're going to be placing another element on top of it, and we want to make sure that everything goes in the right place. So grid row of 1. And here's the thing that's new. This is what makes it go to 100% of the viewport height. Height : 100 VH. We can do width here as well, but we actually don't need to. We'll put it in as 100 VW. So that says, make the header appear on 100% of the viewport's height and 100% of the viewport's width. The next thing we'll need is the background image. The path to this is the images folder. It's a file called jazz.png. We'll do background repeat. No dash repeat. We'll do background position. And we're going to type center. This is what makes it so the image will appear in the center, both horizontally and vertically in the background. And it will then cut away elements on the outside of the image as opposed to some other direction. So background dash position center space center. We'll finally do a background dash size. And to make sure it covers the entire area, we'll type cover. I'm going to add a z-index to this of 1. Because we want to make sure that the element that goes above it will be on top of it and not underneath it. Next element we'll create a class of .header-text. This particular class contains most of the content on the top of the page, so there's a fair amount of stuff to put in here as well. It's going to go on top of the header itself. So notice the header up here is positioned at columns 1/7 and grid row 1. So we want this to go in the same location. So we'll put in grid-column 1/7. We'll do grid-row of 1. We'll give it a background color. We'll use RGBA. Inside the parentheses, we'll put 0, 0, 0, 0.3, which is red, green, and blue 0, 0, 0, so that's black. Transparency is 0.3. We want the text to appear up here as a color of white, so we'll do # FFF. Give it some padding all the way around, 30 pixels. Let's do some styling next to the header text dash, or space rather, H1. So the H1 itself, we're doing a contextual selector that looks like that. We're working on the Urbino Jazz Club words here. Let's give it that background color there that is black with some transparency as well. So we'll once again do RGBA. We'll do 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. I'm going to do 0.4 here. And let's give it some padding. We'll do 25 pixels at the top and bottom, and 35 pixels on the left and right. Let's next style the button. BTN is the class name. And the button, of course, we're talking about is this one down here that has enter on it. It has white text and it has a red background. There's also some border radius on the edges or the corners of the background. Let's start by giving it a font size. We'll do 1.8 EM. We want to do a red background color on this. We're going to do background dash color. Once again, RGBA. Red would be 255, comma, space, 0, space, like so. And for this one, we'll do a 0.4 again for transparency. We want the text color again to be white. By doing that. And we want some padding on this as well. 15 pixels at the top and bottom. And we'll do 40 pixels on the left and right. The border radius can be completed like this. I'll do 15 pixels on each corner. Next up, we're going to do the sections. Section 1. The location of this will be grid dash column :1/7. Give this some padding as well. We'll do 50 pixels at the top and bottom and 40 pixels on the left and right. We'll give it a background color of $EEE. And we're going to align the text inside of it by doing text dash align :center. Now that's section 1. Let's go back and look at that again. So section 1 indeed goes all the way across the layout, grid lines 1 through 7 for column lines. Section 2 and 3 will go below that. We'll copy and paste to begin with. 2 times. Change this one to say section 2 and this one to say section 3. Now section 2 is going to go 1/4 for column lines. Section 3 is going to go 4/7. Let's change the colors there a little bit as well. We'll do AAA for this one, and I'll do CCC for that one. Let's see what we have so far. Let's go back to the learning folder. And let's open the file we just created called full screen image.html. We'll open it with, I'll use Google Chrome. Now, we don't have a complete layout yet, but we're getting there. You can see most of the pages working fine, but where's the material that goes on top here? So we're going to go back up to the header dash text class that we created and work on that a little bit more. The first thing I'm going to add here is that Z index. I'm going to add a Z index here that's higher than the area below it by giving it a z-index of 2, right? Because header was z-index of 1, that contains the background image. So this text that goes on top, which is inside the class of header-text, will need to be a z-index that's higher than that. I'll give it a number of 2. Let's just check that. Stuff is showing up, but we have some problems we'll go back and look at. Well, we had a typo back here earlier on the button class, BTN, so we're going to change that from RBG to RGB. Now check that. All right, let's work on some of the alignment of these items inside here now. So we're working on header-text. We're going to use flex to do the location information, so we're going to come up here and type display, :flex. So after that, we type in the following, flex-direction. And I'm going to change this to column. By the default, it would be rows. We'll justify content on that main axis to center. We will align items also to center. And finally, x-align, :center. Let's save that and check it. And there you have it. Everything's come together just right. We have a background image that always takes up 100% of the viewport's width and height. And that completes this lesson. Next, we're going to do something very similar to what we just did with the background image, except as you can see here on this page, this time we're going to use a video. A note about production considerations, some things you want to keep in mind. One, you don't want to have anything behind here that's too distracting, of course. People walking around, for example. You'll also notice that this video loops, meaning that it's a short duration video, and when it gets to the end, it goes back to the beginning and plays again. So I tried to find something I could shoot there where that would work well. For example, there's a lighting system in the back of the fountain there. You can see it's blue, it shifts towards green, eventually it'll shift towards yellow and red, and then it will go back to blue. So when I edited this video, of course, I tried to begin it in blue and then end it in blue, so when it started to play over again, it would be fairly consistent. One downside to what I did here was I shot this, I didn't have a tripod, and so the fountain tends to be moving around a little bit in the frame. And when the shot goes again back to the beginning, there's a little jump there because the fountain wasn't in the same location exactly as it was at the end of the video. So this page works much like the background image page. You can make the browser narrower, and you see it takes up 100% of the viewport's height. There's more content underneath. It's set up so that the video plays just within the window of the viewport, regardless of the width of the browser. To understand the concept of how this page will be created, I made a little diagram here. Notice that in the back, where it says z-index of 1 at the bottom, on the left side, this is where the video is going to go. So essentially we're going to make some divs or some elements in HTML, and we're going to put them on the same location, one on top of the other. So the background has the video. I've added something in the middle here that is to do some shading. You probably want to make the video a little bit darker so that the text that shows up on that front layer won't be over anything too bright. We could do that in an editing application for video, for example, like Adobe Premiere, in which case we would be darkening the video there. But sometimes you want to darken the video and do it through HTML and CSS instead of having to affect the actual video. So what we've done is we've created another layer, another box, if you will, or an element that just shades a transparent shade of gray that you can see through, but the effect will be because it's gray, it will darken the video. And then the front layer, of course, contains the text, Urbino Jazz Club, enter, and that is a z-index of 3 because that's going to stack on top. We could do a variation of that In this case, the middle layer is different in that it has a vignette effect, meaning that there's more transparency in the middle and it gets darker towards the outside edges. This will have the effect of making the center of the video look like it's much brighter than the outside edges in what's called a vignette effect. There are other ways to do this. If we go back to this example, this one has no shading at all. I thought you'd like to see what it would look like just with the text on top of the video. With this particular video, it tends to work pretty well. There's good contrast there because the video is fairly dark. But sometimes we want to put that layer that provides some darkening. So here's what that looks like. This next example is going to show you what the solid color gray with transparency looks like. And indeed, it has darkened the video without actually darkening the video. It works kind of like a mask. The next one is a vignette effect. It's a little harder to see over the video what this looks like, but there is a bit of darkening on the outside edges. The next one is another vignette, and this one goes a little darker towards the middle. And finally, this one, which has the greatest effect, and this one makes the outside edges very dark, leaving a kind of pinpoint, almost like a spotlight on the center of the video. So again, they look like this. No darkening at all, a solid color with transparency, a first vignette effect, another vignette effect, which is very similar, and finally, the strongest vignette effect that looks like this. The effect of these layers to provide darkening can best be seen when we don't have the video in the background. So just for a moment, I've removed the video from the background to see what this looks like. And first of all, we're seeing, of course, no darkening with no layer at all. The next one is that solid color with some transparency. So it looks like a very light gray here because it's transparent to a degree, and you can see the white in the background. The next one is the vignette effect. It's much more obvious here without the video playing in the background what that vignette effect looks like. Watch the next vignette effect. You'll notice that the vignetting moves a little bit more towards the middle. And finally, the most dramatic one I showed you. Now without video, you can really see the effect of the kind of pinpoint of light. It gets very dark quickly to the outside edges of the screen. In essence, what we're going to do is create the video in a background, and that's going to be in the header itself. Then the gray layer is going to go into a div with a class name of header-overlay. And finally, the front element over here, that particular one is going to be called header-text. So we'll stack those in the same location using CSS Grid, and with Z-index we'll control which ones go on top of which ones. To make this page with a background video, let's go back to our learning folder. And let's open the document we just created called full-screen-image.html. We're going to open it in brackets. We're going to use this as a template for making the next one because the video page is going to be very similar. We don't want to have to write it all again. So we'll do save as on this, and we'll call it full-screen-video this time, .html. And I have that document, so I'll replace it. So here's the text that we had from the previous document. We'll need to take some of the material out. For example, we go back here, you'll notice that we did change a little bit the sections at the bottom. We had 3 sections in the background image section we did. This time we're going to only have 2. So let's make a change there. We'll go down to the bottom of the HTML. We'll take out the section 3 div, like so. Get rid of the CSS for that as well, which is up here. No longer need that. And sections 1 and 2 need to have a location change. Both are supposed to go 1/7. So let's change this one to that. Section 2 now also goes the entire width. And we're going to get rid of the background image we had put in here as well. That was in the header before. We'll get rid of all of that. Let's resave the document. Check that in a browser too, just to see where we're at. And there's the page. There is no video in the background right now. And you notice we changed it to 2 sections and put one on top of the other. One of the other things you want to make sure you have before we go too far is in the learning folder, you should have downloaded what's called the images folder. When you downloaded the images folder previously, you were given a lot of images, but also inside that images folder is something called urbino.mp4, urbino.mp4. Just make sure you have that and that it's in the images folder from the folder that you are placing the HTML file in. All right, so we have this document basically ready to go. The first changes we're going to make are going to be down here into the HTML section. We're going to need most of this here just as we have it. Let's begin by going up to the header and adding the video element. So the video itself is going to go inside the header. The tag for that is video. It's an HTML5 element name. And we're going to add the following to that: autoplay space loop space muted. And the closing tag is there. First of all, let's talk about this. Video tag itself has the ability to give some attributes to tell it how to behave. For example, autoplay is on, loop is on, and muted is on. We want those things on generally because autoplay is there so that when the page loads, the video immediately starts to play in the background. Loop means that when it's run through its few seconds of video, it goes back to the beginning and continues to play it again and again and again. Muted is on. Technically, there is no audio on this clip, and so we shouldn't need muted there, and we could take it off. The problem with that is Google Chrome has been set up so that if you have autoplay on, it needs to be muted in order for it to show the video. And it's done that way by Google because they didn't want to have people create pages where they will autoplay video and have audio immediately come up as well. We've all seen how annoying that can be. So they've made it so that if you use autoplay, you have to have muted for audio, whether there's audio on the video clip or not, in order for it to play. Now inside the video tag, we're going to put in the following: source space src equals quote quote. Inside the quote, we're going to type the path to the video, and this is going to be in an images folder. Again, it's a video, but we placed it in the images folder. And the file name, which is urbino.mp4. At the end of that string, we're going to give it a space, and we're going to tell it what type it is, equals, quote, quote. Inside the quotes, I'm going to type video/mp4. Now, all of the modern browsers today will play MP4 files, but there was a time when we used to add what were called vendor prefixes, or in this case, fallbacks, so that if the MP4 was not supported by the particular browser a person was using, it could use one of the other formats. Those formats were called WebM and OGV or OGG. And we're not going to use that today, but if you ever see more of these lines added, like this line, but instead it changes the extension name from MP4 to something like WebM, and then this would become WebM. The reason for that is it's supporting older browsers. Next, we're going to add the layer that's going to go on top of the video. We decided we're going to give that a div with a class name of header-overlay, and so we're going to add that as well. I will do that below the header itself, and I'll simply give it a div name with a class of header-overlay. Now, we're not going to put any content inside that, so once again, this is going to be called an empty generic element or an empty element, and the div is not going to have anything between the opening and closing tag, but we need to create it anyway so we can write the CSS for it in a little bit, which we'll come back and do. Now, that's pretty much all we're going to add to the HTML that we had from the previous documents. Make sure you have this video information for the video to play and make this empty element with a class of header-overlay. The next thing we're going to do is go back up and write some CSS to make all of this happen. First, we'll go to the header. Up here in the header, we're not going to really make any changes because we want what we have here. We want the z-index of 1 so that it goes to the bottom. We'll make the others higher z-index numbers. We want to have the 100 viewport height and 100 viewport width so that this plays entirely within the viewport. Let's go down next and add the video CSS. So this is an element name called video. It doesn't have a dot because it's not a class name, it's an HTML5 element name. Just add what I'm adding for now, position, fixed. To get this to center, it's a little bit tricky. We're going to type the following: top, 50%. Left, 50%. Transform, translate. And inside the parentheses here, we're going to do minus 50%, comma, minus 50%. And we're going to also give this a z-index of 1, so it's going to be on the same level as the header. The video is going to be there on z-index 1. Now, we're going to write the CSS next for the header overlay, so that is a class name of dot header dash overlay. And here's what we're going to put in the background coloring. The first thing we're going to do is tell it the location. Again, we want it to be grid columns 1/7 for line numbers. So the first 6 are the entire width of the layout for columns. Same location as those items below it, be grid row 1. We're going to begin with a background color here. We'll do the solid color first, background dash color. We'll use the RGBA system. And inside there, we'll give it a color of 0, 0, 0. So that's 0 red, 0 green, 0 blue, in other words, black. But to give it some transparency, we'll do 0.3 here. Let's also give it a z-index. This one needs to go on top of the video and header, so it'll be a higher z-index of 2. Let's go down and check the z-index on header text. Now, from the previous exercise we did where we used a background image, we used a z-index of 2. Since the overlay is on 2, we need to make this go on top of the overlay. We need to add a higher number here, such as 3 for the header dash text. So that's set up the way we want it. We have the video with a z-index of 1. The header overlay with a z-index of 2, and the header text with a z-index of 3. We'll do that much for now. Let's take a look at it, save it. We'll go back out and check it. So here's what it looks like. And as you can see, the video is playing. It has been darkened with the overlay layer. We have a little problem at the bottom, though. The other areas, the 2 sections are not showing up. The reason for that is z-index getting buried. So we have used a z-index of 3 for the header dash text. Let's go down here and add a higher z-index for section 1. I'll go with 4. And we'll do the same thing for section 2. Save that and check it. Refresh the page. And now they show up. So there you have it. We've made a video play in the background. We've darkened it a bit. We put the text over the top. It uses 100% of the viewport's height and width, regardless of how wide the browser is. And of course, it's fully responsive. Let's check now and see what we can do in the way of differences for some of these other backgrounds. So let's go back up and change a little bit the header overlay background. So here we're using background color. I'm going to comment that out. Let's do a different one. So this time we're going to do what's called a box shadow. So for now, just type out what I'm typing, box dash shadow, colon, and type INSET inset, space 0, space 0, space 5EM, space 1EM, space # 000, like so. In box shadow, the first value here is the horizontal offset. The next one is the vertical offset. Then there's the blur then there's the spread, and then there's the color. So again, let's look at that. This 0 right here pertains to the horizontal offset. This 0 pertains to the vertical offset. This value pertains to the blur. This refers to what's called the spread. And then, of course, this is the color, which at 000 for hexadecimal value is black. Let's see what that looks like now over the top of our video. So let's save this document. Let's go a little wider with the browser. And let's refresh. And you saw just a moment there a flash of the layer that contained the vignette effect, so it was easy to see. But there it is applied on top of the video. The page works the same way. Let's do another one. Let's comment that one out. We'll do one more. This time we're going to do the most dramatic one. And this one uses the background property again. But this is called a Radial-Gradient. Inside parentheses, we're going to write transparent. Comma black. And let's see what that looks like. So this one is the most dramatic one. It has the dark, very dark outside edges and the almost pinpoint light in the center. So that's it. That's how we make this background image be a video and function properly using CSS Grid.